Sarah, welcome back. The last time we were on, we talked about productivity and so many different things, our identity in Christ, and just really figuring out what success looks like for us and what God wants us to do so that we can live that out
Mm,
peacefully.
hmm
Today, we're switching gears, and I want to talk about executive function. And I don't know if you know this, you probably don't, but I'm an executive function coach. And the reason I do that is because, thank you. I work with so many women who have never even heard the term executive
Yeah.
function.
Mm-hmm.
And these are skills that we should have learned in high school, in college, in life in general. Simple things like managing deadlines, different coping skills, and all these different things. But what I found intriguing is that you're doing it for children. And
hmm
how beautiful is it to start with the blank slate, teach them the things that they should have learned so that they're not trying to figure this out as adults. So before we jump into executive function, tell us who you are and how you even got into this world.
Sure. So obviously, I'm Sarah Collins. I'm an occupational therapist in background, also homeschool mom. And so executive functioning is something that we touch on for sure in OT school, because what we look at is what a person needs and wants to do during their day.
Mhm.
And, what we talked about success before, but like what helps them to what makes them successful in that within being successful in what they need and want to do. So when there's a struggle to get to that level of success, or what it is that they would define success as there, oftentimes it has to do with executive functioning. So it could also be other things like motor skills, social skills, the way the environment is set up, things like that, sensory processing. We look at kind of what is it that is holding a person back, try to help within the person, or making changes in the environment, or making changes with whatever that occupation is, or that activity, the way they occupy their time.
Mm,
So when I'm thinking executive functioning, so what is it, that could be holding a person back from being successful in what they need and want to do? Sometimes is it, getting started with a task? Is it,
right.
your emotional control while you're working on that task? Is it the attention? Is it, your prioritization? There's so many different things
Or
that
lack
we
thereof.
work through, right? Work through. And yes, you said that, I work with kids to do this. Actually, what I do is work with parents of children. So, um, because of the nature of homeschool OT, occupational therapists themselves, we are licensed in one state. So I'm
Hmm.
licensed as an OT in Pennsylvania, but our homeschool community is not just local, thanks to social media and whatever it is, and websites, it is nationwide and actually worldwide. And so what I do is work with parents on understanding executive functioning, understanding sensory processing, understanding whatever it is that is holding their child back, and then help them to use the homeschool to address those needs.
Mm, love it, love it, love it. So for someone who has never ever even heard the term executive function, let's kind of give them some more examples. So we talk about things like meeting deadlines and like Sarah
Mhm.
said, prioritizing work to be completed, things like regulating emotions. What does that look like? So
Mhm.
as an
Mhm.
adult, you get on Zoom and the internet is going crazy, it's not working, it decides that it needs to update in that moment. What does that look like? Do we scream? Do we have a meltdown? Right? Because
Yeah.
if you're a therapist, what are they doing? Right? Maybe like organization.
Yeah.
I'm the person who's like, kids, have you seen my phone? Like
Same.
organizing your
In fact, I have an Apple Watch just so that I can ping my phone, because I never know where on earth
right.
my phone is.
And it's funny too, because I don't know this, but I'm thinking it's two different sides of your brain because I may not know where my phone is, but I can organize my thoughts
Mm.
and organize, like my Google Drive is well organized. Where my phone
Yep.
is, I don't know.
I don't know. Yep.
I don't know if it's two different sides of your brain, but even the ability to hold information in our heads. I
Yeah.
am a copious note taker. And the reason for that is I forget. I
Yeah.
try to do the active listening and I don't want to cut the person off and I don't want to jump in, but I'm like, but I really want to say this. Let me write it down. But am I actively listening if I'm, thinking about my next
Yeah.
thought?
Yeah, isn't that interesting? And you're right, like we all do have strengths and weaknesses even within our executive functioning skills. So, interestingly, my mom was a gifted and talented teacher. I don't know if they still even use that term, but she was a gifted and talented teacher, and so she used to have to do a lot of standardized testing for students. So she practiced on me oftentimes and on my brother. But I even remember as a senior in high school, my working memory, which is kind of what you were talking about, where did I put my
Yeah.
phone? My working memory was that of a kindergartner. Like this is
Mm.
literally something that I struggle with on the regular. Things like, I because of that, I have to, if I'm following a recipe, I can't just read all the ingredients and go grab them all. I have to go step by step by step.
Yeah.
And I cannot also watch a YouTube video and make something from that. No way. I have to have it written where I can keep going back and back and
Yeah.
back. And these are things that I know partially because I've studied executive functioning so much, but also because of metacognition.
Hmm.
So metacognition is that awareness of yourself, of your own strengths and weaknesses, of being able to make those changes, um, to and adaptations to be able to help yourself and be able to advocate, so you have to know, wait, my working memory is terrible,
Right.
so what am I going to do to compensate for that?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's funny because I feel like they're constantly added on. When I first
Mm.
started studying executive function, it was 7. And then there were
Yeah.
9. And then it kept going up. I'm like, wait, they're 11 now? Has it changed? Is it still I think they're
Yeah, and
11
there's
now.
different models, I think you're probably talking about Peg Dawson and Dan Guar who do they've broken it down into 11. There's a man who's, oh, I don't remember his first name. His last name is Brown because he does it's called the Brown's Executive Functioning Assessment, and that's what I give a lot to clients. And he has 6, but a lot of them
Okay.
are broken down in within what he would call executive functioning skills. So he
Like the
says
work is memory.
activation,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So he has activation, which includes task initiation. It
Mhm.
includes your prioritization. So, it's a different way that things are broken down. Tip of my
Yeah.
solution.
Yeah. So, and let's talk about how you would help a child. So I think a lot of people joke and say, oh, I have ADHD. Don't send me a video that's more than 3 minutes because I'm gonna, have a short attention span. Um, or, we have people who will only react because they don't even have the attention span to respond because they get distracted to do something before.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
for homeschoolers or even adults, like however you want to approach it, what would you say to someone whose child struggles with either like focus? Because for
Mhm.
me, I just say focus, and I know that's not helpful. So, what is a better way of dealing with
What exactly does that look like?
right?
So it is a really executive functioning skills, just like everything. There is a development, right? And then there's a developmental range. So
Mhm.
there actually between birth and 5, there's a huge growth in executive functioning skills, like as a little one. I mean,
Yeah.
even if you're thinking about, when your child was teeny tiny and you like hid something under a mat, they had no idea what that would be. And then
Yeah.
they kind of started to learn, like, wait, if I cry, then maybe my mom would find that for me. Or if I lift this up, they're starting to learn this some response inhibition. So like
Mhm.
I'm not just gonna scream and cry all the time, but I'm going to ask or I'm going to talk,
Yeah.
so this is all between birth and 5. And then there's kind of a pruning within the brain of it cannot continue to grow at that pace, or our brains would be giant. But instead, there is a pruning of, wait, what are these skills that we actually need?
Mm.
And then again, around 11, there's another giant growth. And that is oftentimes when we are also raising our expectations of our children. So we're raising them as far as we're raising the expectations like, wait, I told you you need to write this paper. Well,
Yeah.
wait, what does that actually mean? First, that
Mhm.
means like, what are the steps to that? And do I have all my
Mm.
materials? And when is it due? And so I have to prioritize and organize and get started and keep my attention. Like that's a lot of skills all at
Yeah.
once. So when I'm working with families, I'm number one looking at what are these skills and within the person, what are your child's strengths? Because we want to be pulling on those.
Yeah.
And how can we match our expectations in our environment to our child's strengths? So if we know that gathering all the materials to get started with something is really hard, then we need to help set up an organizational system for our child.
Mm.
Or if our kiddo is like, great, I know that I have to, you want me to, I don't know, do a project on an astronomer or something, whatever. I don't know, I'm making something up. I need to give you I need to have this done by this date, and I need to, make sure I have all my supplies, and I need to actually glue it on my poster board or whatever. I'm totally making this up, but if breaking down into those steps is difficult, like that prioritization, then we probably need to have a system to set up and to say, here's your end goal. What are these steps that you're going to need to do first? So that would be, a piece of it. If it is, like you were saying, focus.
Yeah.
All right. So we need to stop and actually think about, all right, so what is happening? Is there a lot going on around us that we need to limit some of the extraneous noise or
Distraction.
visual stimuli or, whatever? Or is it that our kiddo needs to move, and that's okay too? I don't know why we decided that we have to sit to show that we're listening all the time. So what could that look like? And is that us that we're putting that on our children, or are we saying, oh wow, I'm observing you, and when you are wiggling and rolling on the floor, you're able to tell me what I was reading, so you don't actually need to sit still, 1 2 3 eyes on me, so we really need to look at our child in our environment and what they need and want to do and make a nice match. So that's what I work on with families.
You touched on so many different things, and I'm so guilty. Like, I'm that mom that you're talking about. So the first thing, one thing you talked about was expectations. And, you talked about developmentally what should happen cognitively in a person's life. And I don't know that I know all that by heart, but I'll say, you're 7, you're 9. And in my head, I made up what
we have a vision of what a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old are. And
right.
Yeah.
And I'm so cognizant. I'm like, I'm not going to do the age shame, and I'm not going to do the you're this, so you need to know that. But in my head, I'm like, wait, I have this expectation of this child being able to do something because of that age. And then sometimes what I'll notice is maybe the 9-year-old will do something that I expect. Well, not do something that I expect, but the 7-year-old can do it. So I'm like, wait, it's not just about age. There's personality. There's, like you said, there's distractions, and then there's the executive function piece of what you're strong in and where you need. There's opportunities for growth. But it just really made me think about when you were talking about the paper, how all these things that they're expected to do that we probably did in college or high school, right? We're expecting them to take a blank piece of paper and go and produce this thing.
Yeah.
Maybe they did it orally. Maybe they were so eloquent and they told you this grandeur story, and we're like, okay, great. Go write that. And they're like, it was big. And you're like, wait, there's a disconnect.
How did it turn into that? Yes.
There's a disconnect, which we're not thinking about the executive function that it takes to hold information in our head while performing these complex tasks. That's the working memory. We're not thinking about the sustained attention where, but my brother's running over there and that's happening. And at no point did I think all of the executive function skills that you need to engage just to do one task. Well, my expectation is, here's this blank paper, go get it done.
Yeah.
And then having to remind myself, this is not a disciplinary issue. This is a expectation and a role issue. I'm the one who's supposed to teach them and not just figure out, but realize, oh, if that's the issue, then here's the system or the structure that we need to create. Okay, I'm guilty.
Yeah. I'm guilty too. I work through this with so many other families. And then can I tell you, my daughter, well, I don't know. I didn't ask her if I could tell you. I always talk through with them of like what I'm allowed to say and what I'm not allowed to say when I do podcasts. But so I might have to send you an email, be like, say that part. But when she
hypothetically speaking.
Yeah, right. Hypothetically speaking, several years ago, so we have always done online math because math is not my strong suit at all. And our relationship got much better when I sent that to an online program. But she started to get overwhelmed with getting it done during the day because she didn't really understand. I don't know exactly. This was several years ago. What, but then it kind of spiraled to where she was like, well, I'll do it at the end of the day. And then she didn't do it that day. And so then the next day she was like, oh, well, I'll do it this. And then she didn't do it. And then there were several days in a row where she never accomplished math. Right. And so in my mind, like, I was just writing down a list of stuff and she should just know that she should get that done. And I wasn't even following up and checking.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to go back and reevaluate. That was on me, right? Because I was not doing a follow-up of what she needed at that point. She was like 11 years old and she was not that independent where she could be like, well, I have to, this is how I'm going to set up my whole day. And this is how I'm going, how I'm going to get everything done in a day. Like that's what adults do. You know, we look at our day and set it up. That's not something that an 11-year-old necessarily should have been doing. So I will say that I am guilty in myself that I was just like involved in other kids and I let this slack as well. But it took us going back and looking through and saying, okay, so how can we set this up so that we know these things are getting done at a certain point? We had to redo a planner and she got really into drawing in her planner and, you know, highlighting it and making sure that she, you know, set up kind of her day with in a way that was enticing to her. She took some ownership of that. We had to work through that together. We tried out some, you know, online planners like Trello and things like that. And that was not her thing at all. So we have to be talking about these things with our kids. Like, is this system working for you?
Right. Do you even have a system?
Right. My son, who's now 12, he this year is starting to take a little bit more ownership of like, I give him a list of things to do and he can kind of decide when and where and how that's going to all happen. But he knows his body needs to move frequently. And so he decided that he was going to write everything on a whiteboard and put it up in his room so that when he would finish something like down here with me, then he had to run upstairs and cross it off and then come back down. Like that was his idea, right? It was his ownership because we have talked about, all right, what is our organization system going to be? So listening to our kids and having them kind of identify some strengths and weaknesses within themselves, and then some of their own solutions, it can be so, I never would have come up with that, you know, but it can be eye-opening, what they come up with.
And if it makes you feel better, you were doing this for an 11-year-old. My boys are 7 and 9. And I was probably doing this last year when he was 8. So anyways, but you know, I'm doing this with adults. So why didn't it dawn on me that, hey, if I'm working with an adult who hasn't mastered this, no fault of their own, why am I expecting my 7-year-old and 9-year-old to have this down?
Be able to do it. Yeah.
Right. So it's so interesting because like as you were talking about you know, some children need to move, and if you say something to them, they can regurgitate everything you said, even though they weren't sitting down, you know, with full eye contact. That means that they can do it. But it's this concept of us unlearning what the public school told us that we needed to do, the desk and the chair. I remember when I first started homeschooling, I was looking at curriculums and one thing said couch subjects. I'm like, couch subjects? Who learns on a couch? You need to be at a table and a chair. What do you mean couch subjects? But now I'm slowly, slowly moving into, okay, we can do a read aloud on the couch. You guys want to be on the floor? Drives me crazy, but okay, you can be on the floor. And you know, it goes back to that idea of, yes, the kids need to move. It's not a matter of discipline.
No, it's not.
Body.
And in fact, if we are allowing our kids to move and they're able to focus more on what we are talking about and reading and, you know, doing life in that way, not focused so much on holding their body still, and they're able to take in more information. Oftentimes kids, you know, if I asked you, like, what did you learn in 7th grade? Or it is also why when my daughter was in public school, when I'd be like, what'd you learn today? I don't know. You know? A lot of that, because there's a whole lot of time spent learning how to be still. And is that really a skill that we necessarily need? Sure, we need to be able to sit, you know, for a little bit, but older, that's like, I need to sit through with this meeting and talk to you, but that doesn't actually, I'm actually literally sitting on a sit disc right now so I can move and wiggle, and it's not like you care. Um, but there's so many jobs in our world that you don't have to ever sit. So
Right.
why is that such a big deal?
Right. And that's
Yeah.
the thing, like that's the part that we need to unlearn. You
Yeah.
need, when you're in public school and you're going to like how, the reason school was created back in the days where you're going to the manufacturing, you need to do
Yeah.
the division of labor, or you need to
Hmm.
sit in church for X amount of hours,
Yeah.
then yes, you
Yeah.
need to know how to do that, right?
Hmm.
But it's this
Hmm.
glorified thing of children need to learn how to sit and they need to sit up straight and they need to do things. But why? If I
Why?
pull them out of public school, then maybe my why change. Maybe they don't need
Yeah.
all those things. So
Yep.
am I saying the kid needs
Yeah.
to be running around like a chicken without a head? Absolutely not.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
we need to think about the things that we're doing, unlearn what no longer
Hmm.
serves us, and really try to redefine again what success looks like
Yeah. And
individually for our kids too.
yeah, absolutely. We have a saying in our house, like, your needs are not more important than your brother's needs or whatever, because
Mm,
my son needs to move frequently, but for my daughter, like, extraneous movement can be very visually overstimulating for her. And then she's focused on what he's
wow.
doing. She cannot concentrate on what I'm doing or what I'm saying. And so there's a piece of that, like, your need to move is not more important than Annabelle's need for you to be still. And so
Yeah,
we have to kind of talk about that each and every day. And that really comes down to more of that self-awareness of,
right.
hey, I need to move, but I can't get up and run back and forth right now because that's going to bother my sister.
Hmm.
I need to, wiggle right now. I'm talking to you, but I can't get up and pace because
Yeah.
that would distract you. Right. So that is a continuous thing. So what else can I do to help get that?
Mm,
And that oftentimes takes some problem solving, is that I need to do it before and I have enough heavy work that then I
yeah.
can, be regulated enough to sit, or do I need to have something different so I can sit here and wiggle, or, whatever.
Hmm.
But having those conversations, and also reading and talking about it in book characters.
Yeah,
Oftentimes that's easier because you can assess how someone else is doing a lot easier than you can yourself.
absolutely. Yeah.
Um, there is on my website on Homeschool OT, there's a book study on Hatchet, um, where we talk about Brian's executive functioning skills throughout the whole thing. And we assess, like, how well did he do? I mean, he survived on an island, if you've ever read that.
No, I
So he
haven't.
clearly had some great task initiation, prioritization, organization, like all of that, emotional control. My goodness.
Yeah.
Um, so it talks about, assesses Brian's the whole time, so that then you can be like, at home, or what would Brian do in this moment? And that it's
Mm,
easier to pull in
take the
somebody else.
focus off them. Yeah.
Yeah.
And talk about someone else.
Yeah, exactly.
I I think it's being normalized though, the fact that movement is not a
Mhm.
bad thing, because I remember right before I quit my job, we were starting to get stand-in desks.
Mhm. Yeah.
And for before it was just a medical thing. It was like, oh, I have a back issue, I need to
Mhm.
stand. Now it was like, no, people work better, or some
Yeah.
people work better, right? And then I was on a panel sometime last month and I brought my three kids with me. And then I
Mhm.
saw like all these fidget toys on the
Mhm.
desk, and I'm like, oh my God, that's so sweet. But then I looked at all the other tables and they had them too. And I was like,
Mhm.
oh, they are normalizing that some people literally need to touch stuff,
Yeah.
fidget, do the
Yeah.
thing. And for them, it's like, well, if that's what you need to focus
To
on
do, then
what's
let's do
happening,
it.
then,
Right.
sure.
Yeah. And that also looks at, like, again, your needs are not more important. Like, if I'm sitting here with a big fidget spinner, right, that might be obnoxious, but I do wear a ring all the time and I just twist it on my finger. Like, all of us have what we call sensory quirks, meaning
Yes.
there are things that help us to stay in that zone, like where we can focus and talk to each other.
Hmm.
Uh, what we need to help our kids to do is realize, what are those with you, what does help, and what
Mm,
allows you to focus that attention. Do you need to fidget? All right, so what is the ways that we can do that that's not bothersome to everybody else?
mm,
And that's okay. Like, yes, fidget, move your ring around, wiggle, whatever. My son builds Legos, like, continuously,
mm.
as I'm reading aloud, because he's a, like I said, a big mover, but he's also a fidgeter. And so
Right.
he is focused in on that, he's able to attend to me a lot better. It's not a distraction.
Mhm.
In fact, the book Grasp by Sanjay Sarma, he wrote it, actually it came out in 2020, I believe. He's a cognitive scientist out of MIT.
Mhm.
And I don't have it right next to me, so I don't want to misquote, but he basically has said some in there that talks about, if you are interested in something, it doesn't matter what you are interested in. If your interest is piqued, your ability to learn of anything else around you is increases. So if
Uh,
he's really interested in those Legos, his ability to learn and take in what I'm doing, or what I'm reading,
mhm.
or, whatever, then he is learning more than rather if I was having him try to sit still. And that's what his interest was on, was the sitting still. Right.
That makes sense. And you did mention earlier that even though they are doing the thing that you asked them to do in terms of sit-in, the focus is now on the sit-in versus what you're saying.
Mhm.
So you still lost them, even though
Yep.
physically
Yep.
they look like
Mhm.
you're not. One quick thing I was gonna say when you talked about sensory is if you have like, because I love to make this practical for parents so that they can hear
Mhm.
and see their kids in it. If you have a kid who's like always too close to someone, again,
Mhm.
you don't want to just scream focus for the previous example, you don't want to just focus personal space. You don't want to scream that, right? Like, what would you say is like a more productive conversation to have around that?
Around just like the proximity of
Yeah.
people. I mean, yeah. So it's really interesting. Sensory needs, and we kind of mentioned sensory quirks.
Yeah.
The sensory system is unique to each individual, right? And it's a little bit different than our executive functioning that kind of we were initially talking about here. But um, we as parents, like we have these like, again, these expectations of our kids and our social norms of like how far away we should be standing, or what we should,
Yes.
what we should be doing, our proximity. And so I think in general, when kids are like trying to be really close in on somebody, or they're like bumping into things, that is typically, now again, this is a kind of
It
a
differs.
generalization here. Yeah. Typically they're trying to get some deep pressure. They're trying to get the proximity, the input through their joints, which
Hmm.
helps to calm the nervous system. That is one of the top ways. It's the sense is called proprioception. So if they're bumping into things, or they're hanging on you, right? Or they're like dangling on the furniture and going, or, they're, running down the hallway and crashing into something, or they're hitting, right? Think about
Hmm.
how much information is getting through a joint, all of your joints. If you hit something, it goes in through your knuckles and your wrist and your elbow. You get so much information,
Yes.
which helps to calm your body down. So what we usually try to do then is some heavy work. So if a kiddo is like all over you, I see this is what you're doing, right? I
Hmm.
see that you're hanging on me. It looks like maybe your body might need heavy work, or whatever term it is that you use in your house. It looks to me like you might need to jump. A lot of times I'll model it. My my son and I, he'll laugh at me because he's writing a paper, or like we're talking through what he has to do, and his body often gets very overwhelmed. And I'll be like, let's do some push-ups, So we just get down and I model that right along
Mm.
next to him. So having a language, whatever that is in your home, of I see this and here's something that we can do, um,
Mm.
to model that together and speak about it.
Thank you for sharing that. So practical. And you're giving us powerful language too. It's like you don't want to just respond to your trigger, but what do I say? And you're like, I see this. Let's talk about it. Right. So thank you for sharing that. Like you mentioned that even though you're in PA, you're online. So how can people reach you? How can people, what kind of people do you work with? Tell me more about
Mhm.
working with you.
Yeah, so I am Homeschool OT online, also on social media. It's Homeschool OT on Instagram. And what my role is I work with families
Mhm.
whose kids have things that they need and want to do that for whatever reason they're struggling with that. So I work with the parents to kind of find out what is that reason,
Yeah.
and what can we do? How can we use the homeschool to help? So I do that through private consultation. I do that through, you mentioned before, public speaking. So you've heard me speak before. I do a lot of that. I do it through community. I have a Homeschool OT membership where we once a week I have open office hours where people come in. All the resources I make are there. And that's been just beautiful because there's people all over the homeschool families all over the world, like Bermuda, Australia. It's so cool. So there's that. You can find all of that at homeschoolot.com.
Awesome. There you have it. Executive function masterclass in under 30 minutes. You are a wealth of information. Thank you so much for sharing your resources, creating community, and just really encouraging us and reassuring us that we're all different and we just need to figure out how to help each other to cope, to regulate, and to do all the things to manage life in general.
You got it. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure.